Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning, and welcome to this seminar where Shivani Singh, one of our ACIAR-supported past Masters scholars from the College of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry at Fiji National University. Shivani has a bachelor's in veterinary medicine, and her research is aligned to the ACIAR research project Enhancing the Management of Antimicrobial Resistance in Fiji, a project led by Dr. 𝘍𝘯𝘯𝘯𝘯𝘪 at CSIRO, and Shivani's primary supervisor at FNU is Dr. 𝘍𝘪𝘫𝘪𝘮𝘠𝑒𝑟𝑒. Shivani has recently submitted her master's thesis, and her presentation today was originally presented at the TROPAG conference in Brisbane. Shivani will be talking on the knowledge on antibiotic use and resistance among poultry farmers in Fiji. Thank you very much. Shivani, over to you.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you for the introduction. So today's presentation is on the knowledge on antibiotic use and resistance among poultry farmers in Fiji. This is actually one of the experiments of my research. There is another experiment that we haven't actually released the data yet. We are waiting for the thesis to be marked and completed so that next year I can do a complete presentation of all the data, since that we have to keep that data on the low at the moment. So I'll just be presenting on the KAP on poultry farmers here in Fiji. Okay, so antimicrobial resistance. AMR is an emerging global public health threat linked to the overuse and misuse of antibiotics. Animal production uses antimicrobials for prophylaxis or growth promoters. Antimicrobials used in animals is a risk factor for the emergence of AMR that can spread between animals, human, and the environment. So farmers' knowledge, attitude, and practices, which is the KAP, are among the contributing reasons for the improper use of antibiotics. So at the moment, 6 out of 18 most alarming antibiotic resistance threats that cost the US almost $4.6 billion annually are the vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus, the carbapenem-resistant bacteria, there's a methicillin-resistant staphylococcus, there's another sort of carbapenem resistance in the enterobacterials, there's a extended spectrum cephalosporin resistance, as well as a multi-drug resistance among Pseudomonas bacteria. So it is quite interesting to see this, as these are the most important bacteria, antibiotics that are being used. Carbapenem is a important bacteria, antibiotic that is used in human side of a medicine. So it is quite fascinating if we want to know if there is a link as to why this resistance is coming up. Is it only in the human side, or is it linked to our animal side as well? So there's 3 categories when it comes to antimicrobial resistance. There's animal, human, and the environment. So my research was focused on the animal side, and the main purpose of this research, since it was a One Health approach, the main purpose was to find out if there's any link between the 3 of them. As we all know, when it comes to animals, we mainly refer to food-producing animals, and food-producing animals use a lot of antibiotics. This is mainly for growth purposes, but they also use it to prevent diseases. So when food-producing animals are not properly kept incoherent with the withdrawal periods, there's a high chance that these antibiotics are leaked into the environment through their feces, or which is used as manure, and this goes into the soil, and then it leaks into the rivers and waters. So that's how it spreads into the environment. For human, it's mainly based on the consumption. Since we consume these food animals, it is important that we follow the withdrawal periods. When we don't, then there is a high chance that the residuals from those antibiotics can pass into human. So right now, there are other linked studies going on to see if the antibiotics that are being used in animals, if it's present in the environment as well as the human sector. So what we are actually doing is we are testing for the genomic side. We test for the bacteria that is resistant. We check the genes, and if that particular gene is present in the bacteria that is found in the environment as well as the human samples. So for our KAP here for my survey, we targeted around 225 farms. We did a questionnaire-based survey where we asked small-scale poultry farmers who had a stock of probably more than 20 questions based on antibiotic use, if they knew what antibiotic resistance was, if they knew what type of antibiotics they're using, if they had any sort of knowledge regarding antibiotic, antimicrobial resistance, or antimicrobials in general. So it was quite interesting. It was it was a good experience going and meeting all these small scale farmers in the rural areas and finding out what they know about antimicrobials and antibiotics. So we targeted the area here in Piti Levu, where we surveyed the central and the western divisions. So what we actually asked them were the general information of the respondents. These were their age, which sex group they fell in, if they had any disabilities. We asked what their attitude was towards antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance, what they felt about it. We also asked what were the antibiotics they used, if they did use antibiotics. We also engaged in poultry production activities, where we asked them what are the basic husbandry activities that they practice or follow on their own farms. We also tried to ask them what is their exposure to communication and mass media when it comes to the use of antibiotics and antimicrobials, where they actually get their information from. We also tried to find out the knowledge that they have regarding antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance. So from my survey, this is what we gathered, that when it came to gender, almost 52.9% were male farmers, and there was a 46.7% of female farmers, which is quite interesting, that because we usually think that there's not much female farmers, but it was quite interesting to see that at least 46% of the population are female farmers, and they're well invested in it. When it came to age, this was actually something that cleared out a lot of things for us. There were farmers that were more than the age of 35 years. That was about 75% of them. So this actually shows why there is a lack of information when it comes to antimicrobial use, because there was not much awareness during their time. Now we are starting to get in awareness, and they're probably not as well versed with antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance. So this is how we found out that it could have been more of an age issue, where it wasn't there in their time, but it's here now. So they're finding it hard to grasp the changes that is going on. And then there was another factor that we saw that it came in place, was the educational level. Almost 59% of them had a educational background of secondary education. So here in secondary schools, there isn't much any type of awareness when it comes to AMR or antimicrobial use. So this is why that they are not that well versed when it comes to this sort of issues. However, at least 16% of them had a working knowledge, because they went to tertiary education. So they actually knew what antibiotics were, even though they did not know what antibiotics are used in poultry farming, but they knew what antibiotics were and how it works. At least the general knowledge was there. So when it came to antibiotic use in chickens, so we asked them what do they think, or what do they, if they're using antibiotics, what is it being used for? So almost 68% of the respondents had no knowledge on antimicrobial use or what antimicrobial resistance was. 18.22% knew what antibiotics were, and they said that they usually use it just to treat the infections or for disease treatments. They don't use it as a growth promoter or some other form. So it's quite interesting to see that in Fiji, there is a very vast population that does not know what antimicrobial resistance or antibiotic use is. And they think that it should, but the positive side is that 18% think that it should only be used for treatment of diseases, which is a good thing, since we are trying to make sure that they do not use it as a growth promoter, because using it as a growth promoter also leads antibiotics to and bacteria to gain resistance to this antibiotic. So in a way, when looking at these figures, it's both positive and negative. Negative in the sense that they lack knowledge when it comes to antimicrobial resistance. Positive in the sense they know that it should only be used when it's needed, not overexploited. So the antibiotics used in the small scale poultry farms here in Fiji. So the main supplier is the Ministry of Agriculture. The only two type of antibiotics is available for small-scale poultry farmers. This is the oxytetracycline and the chlortetracycline, which is known as the CTC powder here in Fiji. So they mainly just supply the farmers with the CTC powder, regardless of whatever the disease might be, which is not a good practice. But since resources are scarce and the availability is really low, so this is the practice that they have. So we see that almost 18.2% of the farmers use this CTC powder, which is close to 78% don't use antibiotic at all. They don't rely on antibiotics. So that's actually a positive. We can say that at least they are trying to raise their animals more organically, more naturally, rather than depending on antibiotics. So in conclusion, the results show that 98.2% of the respondents were raising more than one type of livestock, including poultry. So here in Fiji, when it comes to small scale farms, it is more of a diverse farm. They do not raise only one type of livestock. They have more than one. If they have poultry, they'll also have dairy, ducks, sheep, and goats. So it's quite interesting. So since there is a vast majority of animals that they are raising, resistance and use of antibiotics should be taught to farmers. With poultry production, 34.2% of the farmers raised meat bird, while 33.8% raised a mix of both layers and meat birds. So it's common here in Fiji for them to raise both meat and layer birds, but it's quite balanced when it comes to raising, when it comes to the stock type that they have. So the knowledge of the antibiotics was low. Only 31.1% of the respondents knew what antibiotic drugs were, and 68.9% had never heard about antibiotics, which is something that we need to look into. This 68% need to be educated on what antibiotics are and what antimicrobial resistance is, because it is a upcoming issue which is affecting worldwide, not just Fiji. So it is important for us to get this awareness out there. However, the source of information was mainly from Ministry of Agriculture offices. So here we've noticed that it's only the Ministry of Agriculture who does awareness on any sort of livestock diseases, or when it comes to antibiotic training. So I feel that it's a bit of a pressure on the Ministry of Agriculture, since they have to do other they have so many commodities to focus on, and then focusing on the awareness as well, it becomes a bit much for them. And there's another issue that even their own paravets are not as well versed when it comes to antimicrobial use and antibiotic resistance. So interestingly, 88.9% did not know the meaning of using antibiotics incorrectly. So it's quite interesting to see that almost 88% do not know what incorrect use or proper use of antibiotics are. So how are they using these antibiotics? Do they even know what they are doing and if it's the right thing? So they're just doing whatever they're being told. So how can you say that the person who has given them the instruction is actually correct? So these are the things that we really need to look into. So disease treatment option was the top choice on why antibiotics are used in chicken. So surprisingly, only 9.3% believe that veterinarian advice should be taken in consideration on the number of days to give antibiotics to chicken, and only 0.9% respondents would seek animal health professional to administer antibiotics. So when it comes to veterinarian advice, it is important for a farmer to take a veterinarian's advice when it comes to the type of disease that's affecting their stock. So it's the population, the respondents that actually take the advice is very low in this case. And we've also noticed that only 0.9% seek out health personnel to come and administer. And some of these antibiotics can be injectable, but for poultry, it's mainly given in water. But they need a health official there in order to know how to even discard those water, because that water that the animals are being given has antibiotic residues in that. And if you just leave it away into the environment, that antibiotic residue is now in the environment. So it's very important that the farmers are told that they need to seek animal health professionals before administering any sort of antibiotic. On the other hand, 69.3% totally agreed, and 14.2% agreed that using antibiotic in animals does not affect them or their family. So this is a clear area where you can see that they do not know whether or not that antibiotic affects them or no, the ones that we are using in the animal. They think it doesn't affect them. They think that it's okay to use antibiotics on a daily basis on the animal that they are consuming, whether or not they follow the withdrawal period or no. So these are some of the things that farmers in here in Fiji need to be educated on. Moreover, 98% of the participants have never received any form of training relating to antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance. The awareness was through farmers training courses at 48%. So like the preferred method of awareness that the farmers wanted was that the farmers were trained through using courses. So it's interesting that there are farms around here in Fiji, and yet they have no training when it comes to the use of antibiotics or antimicrobial resistance. So farmers that use antibiotics should be taught what antibiotics are and what are the advantages and disadvantages of using it and how they are supposed to use it. They shouldn't just be giving the antibiotics anyhow. And we've noticed that there were some farmers that had antibiotics, but there were no labels. So how do you even know if it's an antibiotic or not? So these are some of the things that we found during this survey and research. So it's quite interesting to see that Fiji, small-scale poultry farmers here in Fiji don't use antibiotics as much as we thought they would. So that's a good part, because then we know that there is resistance, but it's not as high as most countries. So we can start focusing on the basic things with farmers at the moment, like biosecurity, hygiene. These are some of the things that farmers really need to focus on. They don't need antibiotics at the moment just to get rid of a disease. They need to start practicing hygiene, biosecurity, and other methods that will prevent the disease rather than trying to control it and treat it. Because at the moment, Fiji does not have major avian diseases. So we can educate the farmers what antimicrobial resistance and how antibiotics should be used, but we should also focus on educating them on proper biosafety regulations, animal health husbandry practices. All these need to be taught. So I'd like to acknowledge my supervisors, Dr. 𝘍𝘯𝘪𝘮𝘯𝘍𝘍𝘍𝘍𝑚, Dr. Walter, and all the scientists at the CSRO, as well as ACIAR and FNU for the fundings, Ministry of Agriculture for their help, where they provided all the farm list, and the 𝘍𝘠𝘯𝑚 project. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivani. That was very interesting. I'm going to open the floor now to questions. And if anybody has a question, they could have put their hand up, or they could put the question into the chat if they want to do that. Peter?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you, Shivani. Thank you for that shortened presentation, but really interesting. And of course, the thing I'm most interested in is if you can see that there's a need for training to support the farmers, then obviously that needs to be given in terms of understanding antibiotic use, etc. But then you say that the ministry can't really manage it because they've got a lot of other things to do. But my question is, if not the ministry, then who? Because obviously, in a sense, that's one of the key functions of a ministry, is to support the farmers out in the rural areas. So I'm just wondering, who you think should be delivering this training, which that's clearly is needed, and why is it that you don't think the ministry has the capacity to do it? Thank you, Shivani.
Thank you, Peter, for that question. What I meant with that is that it's not just the Ministry of Agriculture that's responsible. Every ministry here should be responsible in teaching the general public as well as the farmers what antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial use is. And why I say that the ministry isn't able to cater to it, so many projects, so many funds to look after, especially commercial ones. And having a lack of staff is the biggest downfall for Ministry of Agriculture here. They do not have the staff power or the manpower to actually go to each and every farm and test or educate. And when they do have trainings and courses, it's quite hard, since the age group here is around more than 35 years, it's quite hard to change the mindset of the farmers here. They're quite backdated when it comes to going towards new innovations or learning new things. They still want to follow their own ways. They still want to have their own practices. Even when it comes to teaching them what proper husbandry practices are, they say that our ancestors have been following this for the past so years. Why should we change it? It doesn't make sense. It's worked for them, so why can't it work for us? So it's quite hard letting just one sector try to deal with it. There should be more than just one sector dealing with it. There should be a collaboration between Ministry of Agriculture, FNU, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Consumer, which is at the moment currently going on. There was an awareness week where Ministry of Health, Consumer, Agriculture, and every other stakeholders got involved, biosecurity, just to try and draft a awareness program which not just reaches out to the farmers, but it reaches out to every single person out there regarding antimicrobial use and resistance. So why I say it shouldn't just be the ministry, I feel that they shouldn't only, because they have a lack of staff and manpower. It shouldn't just be one ministry dependent on it. There should be more than one trying to help out. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It was really interesting. Begged more questions, of course, but good luck with putting together a team from the various ministries and other involved persons, because that is definitely the way to go. Thank you, Shivani.
Yes, thank you. We actually have a team that has been developed. Actually, it's the NAP community. It's the antimicrobial community, and it has all the stakeholders. And right now they have actually developed a new antimicrobial awareness program plan, and now they'll be following that in order to get the awareness out to each and every stakeholder, livestock, whether it's human or environment side.
Thank you, Shivani. Dr. Siaka, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Shivani, for the eloquent presentation. You have addressed the issue quite well. You have asked relevant questions and met the right group to collect relevant data. I want to congratulate you on that. I have no questions as such, but just few technical suggestions. While going through the presentation, I was becoming somehow confused between discerning the difference between tables and figures. Most of your tables, on all the tables, you presented them as figures. I think that need to be corrected when you are going for the final write-up. And in your conclusion, you gave a very interesting statistics, percentages of respondents, those who are ignorant of AMR, the use of antibiotics, those who are, and so on and so forth. Those are very interesting statistics. But I still feel that these statistics should be broken down and related to the information you collected on the respondents earlier, such as the age, such as the educational level, such as, so that we will be able to tell exactly which category of these people is less aware or more aware and so on, than just presenting single percentages. These should be broken down to related to the categories of people and then even those farming more species than poultry. All these statistics are there. I think you need to do some readjustment to take this into account so that where there is need, policymakers will be able to, where there's need for more awareness, policymakers will be able to direct the issues to one category of people or the other. So that's just my suggestion. But apart from that, it's a very good work. You need to further organize the data and present them in a way that will provide more detailed information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. I'll make sure to make those amendments.
Thank you, Shivani. Danny, you have a question?
Yeah, just quickly first, congratulations, Shivani, for making it to the finish line. That's a big achievement. You must be proud of yourself. And yeah, you've done some pretty interesting work. I just wanted to ask a couple questions because from the, if I'm not mistaken, from the data you presented, it was only like 18% of respondents were using any antibiotics. So I wanted to confirm if that's just on poultry or in poultry and all other animal species, because yeah, with those results it seems like the usage is not so widespread, which is not surprising if there's smallholder farmers. And then my second question was like, if you think antibiotic use is a bit more prominent in more commercial enterprises, and maybe that's where antibiotic resistance might be a bigger issue then.
Daniel, thank you for that question. Yeah, so that 18% is just for small scale poultry farmers. These are those that have stocks that are probably around 20 or less than 20, not more than 50. For your second question, yeah, it's mainly the commercial farms here in Fiji that actually use antibiotics. So we are trying to get to these commercial farms and trying to run some of the testings and trying to figure out if they do have a higher percentage of resistance. Hopefully next year we'll start doing with those testings, but it's quite hard to get permissions from commercial farms because they are mainly private farms. So they don't actually like us snooping around and trying to figure out what they're doing. So that's why we are trying to get all this done so we can actually change the policies when it comes to the use of antibiotics and the type of antibiotics they're using. So at the moment, we just try to figure out what's going on with the small scale, if there is an issue there or no. So the major issue is just awareness. We are not that concerned about resistance. It's there, but it's not as big as we thought. So it's just awareness. But when it comes to commercial, we have to figure out if there is a resistance and if there is, what we can do about it and how we can stop them or at least put in a control measure so that they can, we can regulate it out. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivani. Soni, you have a question?
Shivani, a big congratulations to you, Vani, for the achievement today. And you've got a great team with Dr. Mangiri and Gami. Just a question. It's not a question, like it's related to what Peter has mentioned. Since yeah, what Shivani has mentioned is the reality there in the 𝘍𝘯𝘯𝘯𝘮𝘯, what the people, the mindset or the behavior. We have known that most of our the projects have collapsed due to these problems. So my question is, Shivani, what's next for you, or the impact, or what's your plan after this to the communities?
Thank you, Soni, for that question. Well, for that, I'd say what's next? It's since reaching the farmers is quite hard, trying to get their mindset to change is hard, and trying to get new staff into ministry who are more educated. I know that ministry at the moment is trying to get their local vets registered, which is a good thing. Ministry needs more vets, some people who actually know about this antibiotic and the use. So hopefully once these registered vets come in, at least there'll be a bit of less load on ministry when it comes to educating farmers, because then these vets can be used to actually go to the farms and educate farmers on what antibiotics are. Because it's not always that you need to be practicing or doing surgery or anything. A vet can also be responsible for doing awareness jobs and making sure that the person in front knows what that is. Well, in relation to farmers, I really think that's going to take a long time just to try and get them to change their mindset, but it's not impossible. It is possible because when we went to the farms, we saw that there is a change in generation now. The older ones are handing over their farms to their sons or daughters, and these are the ones that have started tertiary education or are about to start tertiary education. So if we start reaching them at an earlier age regarding what antimicrobial resistance is, maybe if we incorporate it at the secondary school level or at least at the tertiary level, they'll at least know what they are and how it should be used. So that's one way you can actually reach out. You reach out to the newer generation because it's easier for them because they understand technology. They understand how the new generation works. When it comes to the older generation, they are still more fixed on what they did during the older times rather than the new technology that's coming in. So hopefully through this project, we'll be able to create something that not only targets the older generation, but targets the newer ones as well. And we get, since there's a new NAC committee coming in and they've started with the program, I hope that they start making more awareness programs more relevant in the rural areas rather than just focusing on the central side. Because right now, most of the awareness is being done here in the central side. I really want them to start branching out, focusing on the outskirts and not just depending on Ministry of Agriculture to do those jobs and educating the farmers or getting out paravets. No, this is something that affects all the sectors, whether it's human, environment, or animal, that every part of that department should be involved, not just one. So I'm hoping once we get through this research, I can make that change where every department starts to take responsibility for each side, not just one.
Thank you, Shivani. There's a question in the chat. Sorry. Are you finished?
All good, all good. Thanks,
Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, wow. There's lots of questions. So Leslie, Dr. Leslie, you have a question in the chat for Shivani. Are there any regulations in place for importing, marketing, and administering these antibiotics in Fiji?
So there are legislations, but those legislations are quite backdated. Like right now, we know that there are some antibiotics that aren't supposed to be used in animal production, but then there is a good thing there that ministry actually doesn't have availability of these antibiotics. So even though legislations are in place, there is no availability. But right now they are currently trying to change the Pharmacy Act, trying to get the act updated because there were some pharmacies that were prescribing antibiotics over the counter without a prescription. So they're trying to change the act. I think by the end of this year, the Pharmacy Act will be changed. The Surgeons Act, which is for the animal side, has also been updated, and I think they're still updating a few of the legislation when it comes to the antibiotic side. So they're starting to create trying to regulate the entry of antibiotics, what type of antibiotics are being used, and banning the ones that should not be used. So yes, there are regulations, but it needs to be updated, and it is being updated at the moment.
Thank you, Shivani. There's a question from Joe. Joe, do you want to just ask your question? It's a very long question you have here in the chat.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Joe.
So I remember because for a while there something happened. I couldn't hear something with the presentation, so I might be wrong with this. Because you mentioned also in your presentation that the farmers were actually using the old antibiotics. Like, were you referring to the commercial farmers or the small ones?
This is mainly for small farmers. They actually, there's a mindset that once they've used that antibiotic for maybe 7 days and they still have that antibiotic left, they can use it later on. They don't need to call a farm health professional or seek advice again. Yeah, that's one mentality that's still going on, that they can keep on using it until it finishes, even though they've been told just use it 7 days and then you can either discard it or give it to the health professional for proper disposal.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, my follow-up question was just based on whether it was commercial or not, but you've answered it. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Shivani? This morning. So we were supposed to also have a presentation from Shivani's supervisor, Dr. 𝘍𝘪𝘫𝘪𝘮𝑗𝑗, but unfortunately he's in the field today. So this session is a little shorter than anticipated. I'd like to thank you all for joining today, and to thank you, Shivani, for presenting. You must be really relieved that you have finally submitted your master's thesis and in time for Christmas holiday. So happy holidays to everyone here, and thank you very much for joining.